One of the really exciting things that we have found as we've gone through and looked at these texts that are Egyptian religious texts that use biblical characters in them. We find lots of little things here and there, all sorts of, there's stelae where Abraham is substituted for Osiris, various little things, but we have a huge cache of papyri that are really Egyptian rituals. And in this cache, we find they're using frequently biblical figures. It's riddled with biblical figures.
We know that the Jews, again, interchanged these types of thought patterns and used symbols to represent their own Jewish scriptures, even though they were Egyptian symbols, pagan symbols. And so it's something that actually has some strong support.
Abraham is a Jewish substitute for Osiris, which is exactly what he is in facsimiles 1 and 3. That's Osiris that, Egyptians recognize that figure as Osiris, but Abraham has made a Jewish substitute for Osiris.
Which is exactly what we find with the Joe Smith papyrus, that Egyptologists say it's Osiris laying on the lion couch. The Jewish, in one twist, would say it's Abraham laying on the lion couch, and that makes perfect sense from a Jewish standpoint, and it's exactly what we find in the Book of Abraham.
So we find that they're using these, and as I did an intense study, what they use the most is the name of Jehovah. That's who they use the most, the Jews of the time. But the top two mortals they use are Abraham and Moses. And the way they use them, it becomes very, very clear that they knew both the biblical stories, but they also knew stories beyond the Bible, extra-biblical or non-canonical stories. They had materials that told stories about Abraham that aren't in our current Bible.
One example of this is a text called the Testament of Abraham. In that text, part of it is a description of the judgment. And this judgment scene is clearly based on an Egyptian vignette from chapter 125 of the Book of the Dead. And many people have seen this. There's Osiris sitting on his throne, and there's a depiction of scales.
And in the test of Abraham, Osiris becomes Abel. And we see some of the Egyptian gods becoming angels. So there's this crossover going on. And like I said, the same thing is found very likely in the Book of Abraham that we have.
So this scene is being used to frame this depiction of the judgment in this Jewish text. But it's been adapted to reflect Hebrew characters and sensibilities. So now Osiris is described as Abel, who is sitting on the throne and conducting the judgment. And these Egyptian gods are now described as angels. So Dokiel and Piroel, they're given Hebrew names. And so this is the kind of thing that was common with the Egyptian Jews using Egyptian iconography, but adapting it to their own purposes.
Another example is from Luke. We have the story of Lazarus and the rich man. In that story, Lazarus, he's a beggar, he's a poor man, he's eating the crumbs from the rich man's table. And when he dies, he goes to the bosom of Abraham. When Lazarus dies, or the rich man dies, excuse me, he goes to hell. And he sees Lazarus in the distance there, and he's bothered by this, and he wants Lazarus to go back and warn his brothers so they don't befall the same fate. Well, most scholars think now that entire story is based on an earlier Egyptian scene where the character in the story of Abraham was played originally by Osiris.